we are to, oh, we are today again with Отец Andrey, with Father Andrey, whom you already saw earlier this year. And if you remember, I also had a podcast from New York, and I was on assignment from Отец Andrey to work there with the archives, because he is now progressing with research dedicated uh, to the Russian. I think the whole church, Russian Orthodox presence in Spain, right? That's what you are doing, not just Madrid.
Well, mainly in Madrid, because the
Uh-huh.
Russian Orthodox presence until the beginning of the 21st century was really limited to Madrid. In the
Okay.
18th, in the 19th century, and most parts of the 20th century as well.
Right. Okay. Okay. And as in another cases, for instance, as it is in Ireland, current Russian Orthodox presence in Madrid has a previous life, and this previous life is Russian Church abroad. And it was very interesting actually to go through the file of the Russian Church in Spain, because there is an interesting letter that I don't think anyone published from Archimandrite John Shakhovskoy regarding this situation. So, and Father Andrei agreed now to talk about some kind of exotic animal. It's going to be, we don't know how this conversation is going to work out, so everything is in the air. But the topic of the conversation was suggested by one of you, and this is Sobornost. So Sobornost or conciliarity, and it's interesting that it's what I puzzled the Russian priest with a question about conciliarity. What is conciliarity? And Father Andrei asked me, "What do you exactly mean? So what are we going to talk about?" To answer this question, I would say that I understand that there are two dimensions that make Orthodox Church tick, operate. Sort of vertical dimension is hierarchical, and horizontal dimension is conciliar. And this conciliar, I mean, along the lines of Apostolic Canon 34, which says that all bishops, they have to recognize their superior one, their superior bishop, and do nothing without his consent. But vice versa, he also doesn't supposed to do anything without knowing his peers' opinion. And that's how I understand Sobornost or conciliarity. And I would like to stop talking, and I would like Father Andrei now to sort of to give mic to him and to comment.
Well, if you do not mind me being slightly provocative, I
Good.
think that
We have-
before we decide what is a conciliarity of the Church, it would be a good question to ask what is the Orthodox Church.
Okay.
Because if someone asked me what is the Orthodox Church 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said that it is a family, it is a communion of 15 autocephalous independent churches,
Okay.
which are in communion and in doctrinal unity with each other.
Right.
Now, when we're in the year 2020, what is the Orthodox Church? You know that now we have broken communion with the Patriarchate of Constantinople, because we said that someone who enters into communion with a schismatic entity himself turns to be a schismatic. Well, that's fine. But if we continue this logic, we come to the conclusion that other Orthodox churches, which have not interrupted the communion with Constantinople, like the Serbian Church or the Bulgarian Church, are also schismatics because they're in the communion with the schismatics. But then, if we are in the communion with the Serbian Church or with the Bulgarian Church or with the other Orthodox churches who are in the communion with Constantinople, then we must be schismatics ourselves.
I'm not
So,
sure if this electricity sort of how to say logic fully applicable, but yeah. Yeah.
well, I mean, if you sort of continue this kind of logic,
Mhm.
and another thing that you can discuss about, well, what is a conciliarity of the church? But I think the definition is that the church is conciliar, and that no particular person in the Orthodox Church has special doctrinal authority, like, for example, the Pope of Rome in the Catholic Church. Well, that's fine, but again, I can ask: is a church which is unable to convoke a council, a conciliar church. Nowadays we see also in the light of the possible union of the heads of the Orthodox churches to discuss the situation in Ukraine, and even before that in Crete, that the council of where all Orthodox churches are present is impossible. Now, of course, in this situation, everyone is blaming the other side, but I wouldn't want to concentrate on that. I wouldn't want to say who is guilty. But this is the reality that the Orthodox Church in the 21st century is unable to gather itself into a council and to discuss the issues which are of concern to a particular church or to all the Orthodox churches. So to me, these two questions are they have open marks.
Right. If we'll bring conversation sort of closer to our home, to Russia, right? Because I initially, you see, that's my question, because I haven't explained myself what I meant. I meant initially more to speak. Yeah, and I mean, actually, you really nice sort of direct this conversation to more theological and broader theological. Meaning of this, but I meant maybe to talk about Russia in the sense of conciliarity, conditions of this, and to what extent conciliarity is meaningful. Is this some so that's something that what I meant to discuss in the homeland and in the diaspora, sort of how do you see okay, so I'm sorry, you see, I'm all over, but as I said, it's going to be freestyle conversation to right. So for instance, how you see a healthy conciliar model on a parish level?
Well, on the parish model, I see the healthy conciliar mode as a form of organizing the parish in a way in which people actively participate not only by obeying the orders, but also by accepting their responsibility of the parish life. And this not only implies their voice, which must be heard at the parish meetings or in some other context by the dean of the parish, but I think that it also to some extent involves, although it may be strange to sound, but I think it also involves the material responsibility for the well-being of the parish. And I'll try to explain this.
Please do.
A couple of months ago, I was invited here to the inauguration of an evangelical church, which is 200 meters from where we are. And when I entered the church, the first thing that I noticed is, how should I say? Well, when you come usually in Russia to an Orthodox church, what's the first thing that you usually see?
Our candle stand.
Yes, well, you see the candle stand and you see the little shop, which sells things.
Right.
And this little shop which sells things is really the motor of the economy of the parish.
Yes,
this shouldn't be surprising. Now, when I came to the evangelical church, I realized that they do not have a shop. And you can come and participate, and you can leave without actually having to buy something or to pay something. Now, how does this work? I don't know exactly how it works, but I assume that every member has a certain responsibility for upkeeping his parish. Now, in our case, for example, something that we can qualify as donations in our parish would account in the best case towards the 20% of our budget. And the rest would be something that we would actually have to sell things, material or non-material objects in order to maintain the parish. So I think that to me, although it's strange it may sound, but to me a good example of Sobornost in the parish is a parish which can maintain itself without a necessity to engage into any kind of commercial activity. Although I'm not saying that it is bad by itself, and it is acceptable as a part of the reality of the fallen world. But I think that if a church community depends on the economical activity which is run by the church, I think this is not a good sign.
Right, but do you mean commercial activity like various services, sort of personal services, memorial services, like panihida. So when there is a fee, that's what you mean by commercial activity.
No, no, not just that. Just basically what we call a parish shop. Father Andrey Kordochkin, who is not very politically correct to record these days, but some years ago he wrote an article called "Where Does the Money in the Church Come From?"
Hmm.
And there he was saying something that's very important. He said that in the vast amount of money that is coming into a parish does not come from its members.
Hmm.
If you think about a church for example, in the big city in Russia, most of the income would come from the people who would be passing by. They would go in, they would buy a candle, they would write a note with the names, maybe they would buy an icon, but they would actually not be members of this community.
Hmm.
And many of these people would be completely unknown to a
Hmm.
priest, neither by name nor by face. So you come to a situation when the church is not really supported by its community, which is the church, which is by the definition a church. A church is a community, but somehow it works in a different way,
It's
which
a
I find sad.
It's similar to our monastery here, because monastery depends significantly on donations, and those donations are nowadays often sent by internet, and there is no way to know faces of those people. And when you pray for them at the offering service at Proskomedia,
Yes,
kind of just think about how they call those, sacred in Buddhism or Lamaism, so
yes,
when you come and you sort of move the thing around, and
yes.
so you.
But even if it is anonymous, it is still a donation. It's not
Mhm.
you're not a part of this. If you accept a donation, you're not a part of this consumption. Big consuming society, which is trying to include the church into its uh, into this world based on the consumption. When I pay for something and I get what I pay for,
Right.
so it's not really the same thing. I think even receiving an anonymous donation is not really the same as selling things to people you have no idea who they are.
I'm not say I'm not say-
Uh-huh.
I haven't detected a problem yet if a church has a little shop, and I don't think they really do a lot of money with selling books, because who buys books nowadays? And I mean, they probably do insignificant comparing with donations for commemorations. I'm not seeing a huge problem with having a shop,
Well,
because
no, the problem is not in the shop. The problem is not in selling and buying.
okay,
The problem when the parish budget is not being formed by the members, who do not
okay.
feel responsible in a sufficient to a sufficient level for the keeping of the church. In other words, they don't think that it's theirs. We had so many people when the church was not built, and they would say, why wouldn't the Russian patriarch build the church for you?
I
So,
hear it all over. Yes, that's this attitude. Yeah, yeah.
and I remember that at some stage, well, which was a few years after I came, but I remember that a woman came to me, and she's from Ukraine, and she said that let's collect donations because there is a monastery in Ukraine, and they want to dig a well, and they need money, so let's do that. And I said, no, I'm not going to participate. And she said, no, why don't you want to just you don't want to you're too greedy to spend the parish money? And I said, no, I'm not. But my task is to dig the well here and not in the Ukraine. So it took some time for us to make people think that the church here is their church, and it is in a way their responsibility. But I think on the whole, the American religious community is more conscious in this sense. I'm just not just speaking about the Orthodox, but I think that on the whole, people are more conscious of upkeeping their religious community rather than Russia. But Russia is not really the thing of the church. It's really how should I say? The same thing happens in regards to the state. Uh, when we spoke last time about this book on patriotism, I think that maybe I haven't mentioned it, but I noticed speaking to the people that all of them or most of them who are not actually working for the state in a direct form, when they speak about the state, they don't say we. They say they or it. They don't consider themselves to be a part of what's going on. A state is a kind of a repressive machine, and they live in a way which is, or they try to live in a way it's trying to avoid the hammer, which is to fall upon them. And I think that in the church, I think what we have to do is we have to come to the understanding that there is no other church except for ourselves. We're the community. So when people say that the church has these problems and the problems of the priest and of the bishops, I say that the bishops and the priests are not the church. You are the church, and you decide what the church is because you are what it is. Well, not just you on your own, but you as a part of the community.
That's right on the point regarding conciliarity. What you are saying right now, yeah, I think that's very beautiful.
So many people, even thinking themselves, identifying themselves as Orthodox Christians, when they would think about the church, being unhappy about it, they would say they. Why do they do this? Why do they do that? And they would not feel themselves responsible because their face is also the face of the church.
Right.
Do you know this brilliant saying about the story about Archbishop Basil Krivoshein?
No.
Well, I mean, he was meant to give a talk on the Orthodox faith.
Okay.
And I think maybe his English was not awfully good. And he came out, and he was already quite old. And maybe he was not as young and so beautiful as he was when he was young. He came out, and there was a little pause, and then he said, "My face is a beautiful face."
Very good. Very good. No, I haven't heard this one. Very beautiful. Yeah. I guess, yeah. It's sort of with all what have been mentioned today, this dysfunctional family that we represent, sort of, and we do resemble sort of the Anglican Commonwealth of churches now, I guess, to some extent, with our situations, right? But
dysfunctional family. Thank you for the definition.
I didn't coin it, but yeah. I'm afraid that's how it is right now. But you mentioned about your task, which I might maybe refer or call as the task to make your people, your parishioners, or our people be mindful about what you said. To turn them into responsible Christians.
Yes.
So not just consumers, but
I think that the way to the conciliarity of the church is to say and to act, knowing that we are the church.
We are the church. Yeah, that's very
not
beautiful.
Not they.
That's
we are
very
the church.
Beautiful.
And that's this is it.
Beautiful. Right.
There is no other church.
Right. Interesting, because you really have to, take time to think about. So, but once you offer this vision, so kind of you open this door, a lot of I guess, how to say, not temptations, but a lot of challenges come in, because if you are just on a passive end, there is priest, and priest would tell me what to do, and so, but once you say you are the church, what does it mean? That's, I think, now we are talking, actually, that's sort of very strong point of this conversation. So, okay, so what should I do? A priest told me you are the church. What do I do with this now?
Well, when you say that this it is a dangerous condition which has some temptations in it, but in a sense it's a very similar to situation if you imagine someone who is coming out for liberty from the prison. While he is in the prison, has no access to drugs, has no access to alcohol, has no access to a lot of things.
Right.
And once he comes out, everything is open.
Right.
Now, does this mean that he is meant to be in the prison forever? Probably not.
Yeah. What a comparison, actually. We do offer, I think, prison models, indeed. Yeah, because it's a safe model. That's what makes people feel safe, because a lot they voluntarily gave up on very many things, and they want, to some extent, I don't want to say to priests to be as their prisoner guard, but some kind of custodian, who would look after them, and you are actually, how to say, you are destroying all this. You are
Well,
destroying.
I'm afraid it's been destroyed by the gospel, because you know what the gospel offers is liberty rather than safety.
Right. Okay. I mean, Gospel is a very powerful book, that's for sure. But then, how would you relate all this to our system? So maybe we should stop actually here
Well, that's a
and
task of a
save,
lifetime, but then we
save
could
it,
continue. Yeah.
save it for next, save it for next conversation. Uh,